Eleanor Vance knew the morning scent of her penthouse well. It was a blend of the nutty aroma of freshly ground specialty coffee beans, the subtle fragrance of lilies in the living room vase, and the lingering trace of Julian Mercer's cologne, which clung to the pillow next to hers. For the last 5 years, that scent had been her very definition of the word home. This morning, like hundreds of mornings before, she watched in silence, sipping her coffee, as her husband selected a suit for work in front of a colossal walk-in closet. Julian Mercer was a charming man. Eleanor had to admit it. Even after 5 years of marriage, his charisma hadn't faded. He had a powerful build, a well-defined face, and a smile that could melt even the most inflexible members of any board of directors. He came from a humble, working-class background, a fact he often embellished into heroic dramas, as if he were a self-made prince who had conquered the world on his own. The irony, of course, was that the world was Eleanor's. Eleanor was the sole heir to a business empire her father had built from the ground up. The Sterling Group, a massive conglomerate spanning real estate and luxury hotels, was now in her hands. She was intelligent, decisive, and respected in the business world, a queen on her own throne. But at home, in front of Julian, she took off the crown. She wanted to be just a supportive wife, a partner. She had given Julian the CEO position of one of their subsidiaries, unlimited access to the finest amenities, and allowed him to be the public face of their shared success. To the public, Julian Mercer was the brilliant husband who kept his wife in luxury. Few knew the truth that Julian was merely the moon, reflecting the light of the sun that was Eleanor Vance. "Honey, what do you think of this one for the lunch meeting today?" Julian's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned her head and saw him holding 2 silk ties. One was navy blue, the other burgundy. "The navy blue?" Eleanor replied softly. "It matches your shirt better." Julian smiled broadly. It was the smile Eleanor had once fallen in love with. "You always know best." He walked over and gave her a kiss on the forehead. His expensive cologne enveloped her, a little strong for the morning. "I have an important meeting with those investors from Dubai. I'll probably be late." Eleanor nodded. She had grown accustomed to those words. Important meetings, potential clients, new projects. The excuses had become more frequent in recent months. He used to tell her the details of his meetings. They would discuss strategies together. Now, his answers were always brief and vague. If she tried to probe further, Julian would laugh and say, "Darling, don't you worry your pretty head about those technical details. I've got it handled. You just sit back and enjoy the results." Something wasn't right. A small alarm in Eleanor's mind had been ringing for a long time, but she kept silencing it. She didn't want to believe it. She had built this paradise with her own hands. She couldn't burn it all down over a mere suspicion. But the small pieces of evidence were piling up, like dust slowly settling on her gleaming furniture. There were credit card charges for dinners at restaurants they had never been to together. Phone calls in the middle of the night that would end abruptly as soon as she stirred in bed. A faint scent of an unfamiliar female perfume on his suit lapel, one that didn't belong to his middle-aged secretary. Eleanor tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Maybe she was just tired. Running an empire like the Sterling Group and trying to be the perfect wife was exhausting. She wanted to trust her husband, the love they had built, the love that had made her willingly hand him everything. "Oh, by the way, honey," Julian said, adjusting his luxury wristwatch, a gift from Eleanor for their 3rd anniversary. "I'm going to need some extra funds for client entertainment expenses, about $500,000. You know, these guys need to be wined and dined for the projects to flow." Eleanor looked at him. It wasn't the first time he had asked. Until now, she had never questioned it. She would simply send a quick message to her trusted CFO, Mr. Roberts, to transfer the money to Julian's personal account. She believed it was part of her support as a wife, but today, a tiny seed of doubt sprouted. "What project is that, Julian?" she asked, trying to keep her voice as neutral as possible. Julian's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, but Eleanor's trained eyes were quick enough to catch it. "The Miami beachfront resort development. I told you about it. It's in the final stages now. We have to pull out all the stops." Eleanor remained silent. She knew every single project in her company. The Miami resort project existed, yes, but it was barely in the initial planning phase. There were no investor meetings scheduled, let alone with anyone from Dubai. The lie was so fluid, so natural, it hurt. But Eleanor simply gave a quiet nod. "All right, I'll take care of it. Thanks, my love." Julian gave her another peck on the cheek, this one quicker. "I'm off, take care." The front door clicked shut. Only silence and the slowly fading scent of Julian's cologne remained. Eleanor sat motionless. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. The paradise she had built felt as if it were made of glass, beautiful and gleaming, but terribly fragile. And that morning, for the first time, she began to see tiny cracks running all over its surface, and she was afraid that if she touched them, the whole thing would shatter. She picked up her phone, but it wasn't Mr. Roberts she contacted. She opened her gallery and looked at their wedding photos. Julian was holding her tightly, smiling blissfully. At that moment, Eleanor had believed the look in Julian's eyes was true love. Now, she wasn't sure if it was love or the look of a lottery winner who had just hit the jackpot of a lifetime. Eleanor set the cup down with a soft click. She had been playing blind for too long. She was a businesswoman, a leader. Her business instincts had never failed her. Why had she switched them off for her personal life? She stood up. The look in her eyes had changed. The softness around the edges was gone, replaced by the sharp glint of a CEO ready to make a tough decision. She wasn't going to destroy her paradise. She was simply going to expel the serpent that had slithered into it. She was going to find out the truth, no matter how bitter. And if there was a betrayal, the traitor would never know what hit him. Eleanor wouldn't scream or cry. She would smile, and that smile would be the beginning of his end. The day unfolded in quiet tension. Eleanor executed her plan with a surgeon's precision. She approved the transfer of the $500,000 Julian had requested, but she instructed Mr. Roberts to trace the flow of that money. The result was what she had expected. The money wasn't used to entertain investors. It was immediately wired to another account to make a down payment on a luxury sports car, a car Eleanor had never seen in their garage at home. At home, Eleanor played her part to perfection. She remained the loving wife. She made breakfast, asked Julian about his day, and listened with a faint smile to his fresh lies about fictitious meetings and projects. Every lie Julian told was another nail he was hammering into his own coffin. Too drunk on arrogance and freedom, Julian didn't notice the icy shift in his wife's eyes. He took Eleanor's silence as a form of resignation, but it was the calm before the storm. That afternoon, Eleanor decided to allow herself a small indulgence. She drove to Fifth Avenue, the city's most opulent shopping district, lined with international designer boutiques. It wasn't that she truly wanted to shop, she just needed a space to think. Away from the theater of her home, she sat at a cafe, ordered a chamomile tea, and organized her next moves. She had already contacted her friend and trusted lawyer, Claire Mason. Their meeting was scheduled for the next day. With her mind a little clearer, Eleanor walked toward the underground parking garage. Her steps faltered when she saw a familiar car. She had never seen it in person, but there it was. A fiery red Porsche 911, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The license plate was new. It was the same car listed on the payment documents Mr. Roberts had sent her. Her heart quickened not with pain, but with adrenaline. The prey she was hunting was right in front of her. And sure enough, a woman emerged from the lobby door. She looked to be in her 20s, tall and slender, in a tight dress more suited for a nightclub than for a day of shopping. Her face was pretty, but her eyes were filled with arrogance and an air of superiority. She walked with a smug sway toward the red sports car. Eleanor simply watched from a distance. She could have left, ignored the scene, but something held her back. She wanted to see the face of the woman who was conspiring with her husband to betray her. The woman, whose name she would later learn was Valerie Thorne, seemed to notice Eleanor's presence. Her eyes scanned the surroundings until they finally met and locked with Eleanor's. A cynical, triumphant smirk played on her brightly painted red lips. Instead of getting into the car, Valerie walked toward Eleanor. Here it comes, Eleanor thought. The moment of truth. She straightened her posture, keeping her face as impassive as possible. "Hello, Mrs. Mercer," Valerie greeted with mock deference, her eyes dancing with ridicule. All alone? Hello, Eleanor replied curtly. She had no time or energy for trivialities. Valerie let out a little laugh, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. She flipped her hair back, a theatrical gesture designed to show off the diamond earrings she wore. They were the same model Eleanor had seen in a jewelry catalog the week before. I just wanted to say hi. I thought it would be rude not to, running into my lover's wife. Don't you think? Valerie said, emphasizing the word lover. Eleanor remained silent, letting the woman continue her monologue. Slightly irritated by the lack of the angry reaction she expected, Valerie pulled out her ultimate weapon. She raised her hand and dangled the car keys, the Porsche logo glinting, right in front of Eleanor's face. The keychain was still wrapped in plastic. "Look," she said proudly, her voice rising as if proclaiming a great victory. "Julian bought it for me." Valerie paused to savor the moment, then delivered the line she had prepared to destroy Eleanor. "He says I'm worth far more than the boring old wife he has at home." The words weren't a slap to Eleanor's cheek, but they were designed to hurt more than any physical blow. They were meant to stab at her pride, to shatter it and make her feel insignificant. Valerie waited, her eyes bright with expectation, anticipating a burst of anger, tears, or at least a face pale with shock. She got none of it. Instead, Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a sad or forced smile. It was a genuine, slight smile, filled with something Valerie couldn't comprehend: amusement, as if she had just heard the funniest joke in the world. "Congratulations on the new car," Eleanor said, her voice calm and clear. That was all. The reaction completely disarmed Valerie. Her plan to humiliate Eleanor had utterly failed. It was like throwing a punch into thin air. All her best ammunition had turned out to be blanks. Eleanor didn't give her time to recover. She gave a polite nod once more, then turned and walked toward her own car, parked a few rows over a black luxury sedan that cost 3 times as much as that red sports car. Once inside the car, with the door shut and all the outside noise blocked, Eleanor's smile slowly faded. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white and her breathing became ragged. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford for this betrayal. The pain was there, sharp and piercing, but on top of it, something else was growing rapidly. A cold, glacial anger, the wrath of a queen whose kingdom had been desecrated by pawns who didn't know their place. Boring old wife. I'm worth far more. Valerie's words echoed in her ears. What a pair of fools. Valerie, so proud of the car she'd been gifted, not knowing it had been purchased with the money of the woman she was insulting. And Julian, her husband, so stupid as to think he could play games with the very source of all the luxury he enjoyed. They both thought they had won a battle. They didn't know that Eleanor didn't even consider this a war yet. It was just a game. And that night, Eleanor was going to flip the entire board over. She would remove all the pieces, cut off all access, and leave them stranded with nothing. Eleanor started the car. As she drove out of the garage, she caught a glimpse of Valerie still standing beside the red car, looking bewildered. Eleanor smiled again. This time, it was a smile for herself, the last smile of a wife. Because the Eleanor Vance who would return home that night was no longer the wife Julian knew. She was an executioner, ready to carry out her own verdict. Without hesitation and without mercy. The drive home felt different. The streets Eleanor always traveled, the towering skyscrapers, the brilliant city lights, everything seemed foreign, as if seen through a different lens. The magnificent penthouse waiting for her at the end of the journey no longer felt like a paradise. Tonight, it felt like a grand theater stage, and Eleanor was done playing the blind protagonist who didn't know her own script. She parked her car in the garage with precise, emotionless movements. Next to her, a wide, empty space waited the spot where Julian's car should be, which at this hour was parked somewhere else, in another life. She entered the silent home. The household staff had already retired to their quarters. Only the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hall kept her company. Each tick-tock sounded like a countdown. She didn't change her clothes or touch the dinner that had been prepared for her. She simply sat on the ivory velvet sofa and stared at the door, waiting. Around 11 p.m., she finally heard the sound of Julian's car. The front door opened, and he walked in with a jovial smile, even humming a little tune. He looked so light, so carefree. He smelled of expensive liquor and the same female perfume she had smelled in the parking garage, the scent of a false victory. "Oh, honey, still awake?" he asked, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Eleanor didn't pull away. She let his lips touch her skin. They felt cold, like the touch of a stranger. "I was waiting for you." "How was the meeting?" she asked, her own voice sounding normal even to her ears. "Incredible," Julian exclaimed, taking off his jacket and tossing it carelessly onto a sofa, a habit Eleanor had always silently detested. The investors were completely blown away. "This project is going to be a massive success. We'll have to celebrate in a big way." Eleanor simply nodded. "I'm glad. You must be tired. Go take a shower. I'll be up in a bit." Julian, completely unable to read anything outside his comfort zone, nodded obediently. "Don't be too long," he said with a playful wink before disappearing into the master bedroom. That's when Eleanor moved. As soon as she heard the sound of the shower in the bathroom, she stood up and walked not to the bedroom, but to her study. That room was the command center of her kingdom, soundproofed and protected by a state-of-the-art security system. It was where she felt most powerful, most herself. She sat in her leather chair and opened the laptop connected to her company's private server. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with terrifying speed. She didn't need to hack anything. As the majority shareholder, she had access to all financial information linked to her name, which included the joint accounts and supplementary credit cards she had given Julian. The first screen she opened was the transaction history of their joint account for the last 6 months. Her eyes quickly scanned the rows of figures and descriptions. The $500,000 transfer from a few days ago was the starting point, just as Mr. Langley's www. Roberts had reported. The money had gone directly to the luxury car dealership. End of story. The first and most blatant piece of evidence, confirmed. But Eleanor didn't stop there. This was no longer about the car, it was about dismantling the entire web of lies Julian had built. She began to go back in time, like an archaeologist digging through the ruins of a destroyed civilization, and what she found disgusted her. There was a clear pattern. Every time Julian went on a business trip, there were always dual transactions. One at a corporate hotel for which a report was submitted to the office, and another on a supplementary personal credit card at a romantic villa or a boutique hotel in the same area. On a 3-day trip to New York last month, the official report stated he stayed at a Sterling Group chain hotel, but the credit card statement showed a charge for a private villa with a pool in the Hamptons, along with receipts for a couple's spa treatment and dinner at a beachfront restaurant famous for its romantic atmosphere. Then there were the vaguely named expenses. Client representation turned out to be purchases at luxury jewelry boutiques. Eleanor zoomed in on one transaction. The date matched the week before she saw the diamond earrings on Valerie. Office supply procurement turned out to be the purchase of several designer handbags from a boutique in Paris when Julian was supposed to be at a real estate conference in Berlin. The lies were so systematic, so meticulous. Julian wasn't just having an affair, he was building a parallel universe of luxury for his mistress, and Eleanor was paying for it all. Every cent of every luxury Valerie flaunted, every designer garment that covered her body, every drop of champagne she drank, had been bought with Eleanor's sweat and her family's legacy. The ache in her heart had gone numb, replaced by a cold rage that settled deep in her bones. She opened another folder that gave her access to Julian's phone bills. Hundreds of calls and messages to one number, a number that appeared with no name, just a string of digits. The longest calls were made late at night, the hours when Julian claimed to be working late or unable to sleep. She didn't need to hear their conversations. The data in front of her was enough to paint a complete and repulsive picture. She saved all the evidence, making a copy on an encrypted hard drive. She compiled the evidence like a prosecutor preparing an indictment. Every bank statement, every credit card bill, every call log was a nail that would seal Julian's fate. The sound of the shower in the bathroom stopped. Eleanor glanced at the clock in the corner of her screen. She had been immersed in this for almost an hour. With a swift movement, she closed all the applications, cleared her browsing history, and shut down the laptop. She stood up, straightened her clothes, and left the study, locking the door behind her. When she entered the bedroom, Julian was already in bed, wearing only a pair of shorts, his hair still slightly damp. He smiled when he saw her. "There you are. I thought you fell asleep out there." He patted the empty space beside him. Eleanor walked to her vanity and began removing her makeup with slow, controlled movements. She could see Julian's face reflected in the mirror, a handsome face that now looked like a grotesque mask. "Just finishing up a few emails," she lied. Lying to Julian now felt so easy, so natural. She had learned from the master. She finished her nightly routine and finally slipped into bed beside him. He instantly pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her from behind and whispering in her ear, "Thank you for everything, darling. Without you, I could never have become who I am." The irony of that statement was so sharp, Eleanor almost laughed out loud. She lay still, rigid in his arms. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. That night, for the first time in 5 years, she fell asleep with her back to her husband, not just physically, but mentally as well. The digital fingerprints had spoken, and in the silent courtroom of her mind, the verdict was in. All that was left was the execution. The next morning, the charade continued. Eleanor woke up first, made coffee, and sat at the table as if nothing had happened. When Julian came down, she greeted him with the same smile as always. If he noticed anything strange, he was too wrapped up in his own world to tell. He ate his breakfast in a hurry, boasting about his plans to expand the company's wings. Eleanor just listened, nodding occasionally, mentally logging every lie that came out of her husband's mouth. "I'm having lunch with an old friend today. I probably won't be back to the office afterwards," Eleanor said as she spread jam on her toast. "Who?" Julian asked distractedly, more engrossed in his phone. "Claire. We haven't seen each other in ages," Eleanor replied. Julian just made a sound of acknowledgement. The name Claire Mason raised no red flags. He knew Claire was Eleanor's best friend from college. What he didn't know was that Claire was one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the city. They met in a private room at a 5-star hotel restaurant, a space where discretion was absolute. Claire was waiting. She was the opposite of Eleanor. If Eleanor was still water, Claire was fire. She had short hair, her style was sharp, and her gaze missed nothing. "I had a bad feeling ever since you told me to meet you here, Elle," Claire said, even before the waiter had poured their water. Eleanor wasted no time. She placed a tablet on the table and slid it over to Claire. "See for yourself." For nearly 20 minutes, the only sounds in the room were Claire's increasingly agitated breathing and the occasional muffled curse. She swiped through page after page of the documents Eleanor had prepared. Copies of the bank statements, credit card bills highlighted with a digital marker, call logs, and even the photo of the red sports car Eleanor had discreetly taken when Valerie was distracted. When she finished, Claire put the tablet down sharply. Her face was flushed with anger. "That bastard, that ungrateful parasite. I told you from the beginning he was just after your money." Eleanor remained calm. "I don't need an 'I told you so,' Claire. I need a strategy." The anger on Claire's face slowly dissipated, replaced by a cold professionalism. She switched from friend mode to lawyer mode. "Okay, first, our prenup is ironclad. All assets in your name before the marriage and anything derived from your family's legacy are exclusively yours. That's already safe." "And the company?" "He's the CEO of a subsidiary," Eleanor asked. "It's a position you gave him. You can take it away at any moment. The board will back you 100%. He has no shares in his name, right?" "Not a single one," Eleanor replied firmly. "Good." Claire's eyes glinted. "Our plan will be a covert op. We prepare all the ammunition, the divorce filing, the termination notice, the asset freeze. We strike on all fronts simultaneously, when he least expects it. We'll take him down so hard, he'll never get back up." Claire began to scribble the key points of the legal strategy in a notebook. They discussed every detail, from the division of property to the grounds for divorce they would file with the court, infidelity and financial fraud, and how to remove him from the house without unnecessary drama. "The most important thing, Eleanor," Claire said, looking her friend squarely in the eye, "until D-Day, you have to act completely normal. Show no emotion. Don't give him the slightest reason to suspect anything. We need the absolute element of surprise." Don't worry," Eleanor replied, her eyes as cold as ice. "He won't suspect a thing." After lunch, Eleanor didn't go home. She went straight to the Sterling Group headquarters. She greeted the employees with a gentle smile as she crossed the imposing lobby. As always, no one could guess the storm raging inside her. She summoned Mr. Roberts to her office. A man in his late 40s who had worked for the Vance family since Eleanor's father was alive. Mr. Roberts entered quietly and respectfully. He was the embodiment of loyalty and efficiency. He had watched Eleanor grow from a girl into a leader, and his allegiance had never wavered. Eleanor didn't beat around the bush. She looked at Mr. Roberts with the same gaze she would use to order a multi-million-dollar acquisition. "Mr. Roberts, I have a mission for you. Extremely confidential and sensitive," she said in a neutral voice. Mr. Roberts nodded. "I am at your service, ma'am." I want you to prepare all the necessary documentation to regain control of all assets in my name. Convert all joint accounts to sole ownership. Prepare notifications for all banks to cancel the supplementary credit cards in Julian Mercer's name. Contact all investment managers and revoke his access. I want to completely shut down every financial door in his name that originates from me. Mr. Roberts listened without his expression changing, but Eleanor could see a faint glint of understanding in his eyes. He had surely suspected something for a long time, but his professionalism had kept him from speaking. "All of this," Eleanor continued, "is to be prepared, but not executed. Keep all the documents in your personal safe. No one else is to know. You will await my signal. When I send you a text message with a single word, now you will push all the buttons simultaneously, at that very instant." "Understood, ma'am." Mr. Roberts' voice was firm. "I will have everything prepared today." "One more thing," Eleanor added. "Prepare a letter of dishonorable discharge for Julian Mercer, CEO of Sterling Properties. The reason will be malfeasance and embezzlement of company funds for personal gain. Attach the evidence of the transfers you already have." This time, a flicker crossed Mr. Roberts's eyes, not of surprise, but of satisfaction. "It will be a pleasure, ma'am." After Mr. Roberts left, Eleanor leaned back in her chair. She looked out at the city skyline from her high-rise office window. She felt tired, but also powerful. Her allies were now in position. The lawyer had the legal cannons prepared. The financial manager was ready to cut the supply lines. She had placed all her chess pieces. Now she was a general on a hilltop, observing the battlefield, waiting for the right moment to order the dawn attack. All she had to do was keep up the act for a few more days to dance one last dance with a husband who didn't know his music was about to stop. The following days felt like walking underwater. Time moved slowly, each movement heavy and calculated. For Julian, nothing had changed. The world still revolved around him. The sun still rose for him. He was oblivious that he was dancing on the edge of a cliff to the tune his wife was playing the unseen conductor. Eleanor played every note to perfection, guiding him toward his inevitable finale. She became an even better wife than she had been. She greeted him at home with a warm smile. She listened intently to his fictional stories and even offered him clever advice on his imaginary projects. She was an award-winning actress on the stage of her own theater. She cooked his favorite meals, made sure his shirts were perfectly pressed, and let him believe he was the king of this palace. Julian's confidence swelled to dangerous levels. He interpreted Eleanor's sweetness as a sign of resignation, her silence as proof that she had accepted her role as a docile provider. He became more careless, more arrogant. He no longer bothered to hide the scent of Valerie's perfume on his shirt collar, assuming Eleanor was either too stupid or too scared to notice. One evening, he came home with a small velvet box. He handed it to Eleanor with the smile of a philanthropist. "For you, darling." Eleanor opened the box. Inside was a common silver designer brooch adorned with a few falsely glittering cubic zirconias. It was a piece of jewelry she would never wear, a cheap item that felt like an insult compared to the heirloom jewelry collection from her mother. She knew this was hush money, a small offering to placate whatever conscience might occasionally prick at Julian. "Thank you, Julian. It's lovely." Eleanor's voice sounded sincere. She even allowed him to pin the brooch on her blouse. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing her husband standing behind her with a self-satisfied smile. To Eleanor's eyes, the brooch looked like a badge of shame. The night of judgment arrived a week after Eleanor's meeting with Claire. Julian was getting ready to go out. He was wearing his best suit, had generously doused himself in cologne, and seemed extremely excited. "Tonight's the night, darling," he said to Eleanor, who was reading in bed. "I'm having dinner with my biggest potential investor. If this deal closes, we'll be opening a branch in Dubai." Eleanor closed her book. She knew, thanks to the tracker she had secretly installed in his car, that his destination was not a business hotel, but the most romantic and expensive French restaurant in the city, the same restaurant where Julian had proposed to her. The irony was delicious. "Do you need anything for tonight?" Eleanor asked, playing her part. Julian's face lit up. This was the bait he had been waiting for. "Ah, good thing you asked. I was a bit worried about my credit card limit. After the car thing yesterday, I haven't had time to sort it out. I don't want to have an embarrassing moment at the register when I'm entertaining someone so important." He paused, waiting for Eleanor to offer a solution. "And?" Eleanor prompted, feigning innocence. "Could you transfer some cash to my account, just in case? Say, $1 million? I promise you, it will be the best investment we've ever made." His voice was filled with avarice. $1 million. A fantastic sum, asked for as casually as if he were asking for candy. That money would never be an investment for the company. It would be the fund for a lavish Dubai vacation for him and Valerie under the guise of a business trip. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, a beat of silence. Julian grew nervous, thinking he might have asked for too much. Then Eleanor smiled, a smile so soft, so full of love. "Of course, darling, anything for your dreams. I'll take care of it first thing in the morning." The tension instantly left Julian's shoulders. He let out a relieved laugh, came to the side of the bed, and hugged Eleanor tightly. He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair. "You're the best wife in the world, Eleanor. I'm so lucky to have you," he whispered. And he meant it. He truly believed his own words. In his small mind, he really did feel lucky. He had it all: a rich, docile wife, a young mistress who adored him, and a life of luxury without having to lift a finger. Eleanor didn't return the hug. Her arms simply remained at her sides. She closed her eyes, letting that final lie wash over her. She could feel the steady beat of Julian's heart against her back, the heartbeat of a man who didn't know his life was about to end in a matter of hours. He was the snake being embraced by its prey, enjoying one last moment of warmth before the venom was injected. "I hope it goes well tonight," Eleanor said when he finally let her go. "Of course it will," Julian replied confidently. He grabbed his car keys, blew a kiss to Eleanor, and left the room with the swagger of a conqueror. Eleanor remained motionless, listening to the sound of Julian's car pulling away down the driveway. The silence that remained felt dense. She got out of bed, walked to the window, and looked out into the darkness of the night. The dance was over. The puppet master had played the final note. It was now Eleanor's turn to take the stage. She picked up her phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up, showing the contact, Mr. Roberts. Her finger hovered over the keyboard, ready to type the single word that would bring everything crashing down. For several minutes after Julian's car had completely disappeared from view, leaving only a trail of arrogance on the empty driveway, Eleanor remained by the window. She let the silence of the penthouse envelop her, bear witness to what was about to happen. There was no hesitation, no regret, only a cold, absolute clarity. She had given Julian enough rope to hang himself. Tonight, she was simply going to kick the chair out from under him. She returned to the bed, not to lie down, but to sit on the edge, her back straight. She picked up her phone. The bright screen illuminated her expressionless face. She opened her messaging app, selected Mr. Roberts' contact. The cursor blinked, awaiting her command. Without hesitation, she typed a single word, "Now." She hit send. The message was gone. 2 blue checkmarks appeared instantly, sent and read. Elsewhere in the city, in a still-lit office, a short text message was received. Without delay, without question, a cascade of digital commands was executed with military precision. Emails were sent to the board of directors, notifications were sent to all banks, orders were executed in investment systems. In less than 5 minutes, the financial universe Julian believed was his ceased to exist. Eleanor placed the phone face down on the nightstand. She stood up, went into the bathroom, and turned on the hot water in the shower. She washed her body, as if cleansing the residue of 5 years of lies from her skin. When she emerged, wrapped in a comfortable silk pajama set, she felt lighter than she had in months. The curtain had fallen. The performance was over. Now she just had to wait for the lead actor to realize he'd been left alone on a darkened stage. Meanwhile, across town, Julian and Valerie were on top of the world. They sat at the best table in the French restaurant, the same one where Julian had knelt before Eleanor years ago. They ordered the most expensive-tasting menu lobster thermidor, a 5 Wagyu steak, and a bottle of Dom Perignon. "To us, babe," Julian said, raising his glass, "and to our future in Dubai." Valerie giggled, clinking her glass against his. "I can't wait. I've already been looking at apartments in the Burj Khalifa. The views will be incredible." "Whatever you want. Gorgeous. The sky's the limit," Julian promised. He felt invincible. He had conquered Eleanor. He had her money. And now he had this beautiful young woman by his side. He was king of the world. They enjoyed their dinner leisurely, laughing and planning their life of opulence. When the bill arrived, the figure was astronomical. Julian simply smiled. He pulled out the black metal credit card he was always so proud of and handed it to the waiter like a sultan. A few minutes later, the waiter returned with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." Julian's smile froze. "Declined? Impossible. Try it again. The terminal must be faulty." The waiter nodded, left, and returned with the same expression. "It's still not working, sir. It says to contact the bank." Valerie's face began to change. "What's wrong, Julian? Don't tell me you forgot to pay the bill." Of course not," Julian snapped, humiliation beginning to set in. "It must be a banking system error." He pulled another card from his wallet, a platinum one. "Try this one." The result was the same. Declined. He tried another. Declined. A cold sweat began to form on Julian's temples. He could hear the whispers from the other tables. Valerie's adoring face was now a scowl of contempt. "I'm just going to an ATM for a moment," Julian said, trying to maintain his composure. He stood up and walked briskly to the ATM in the hotel lobby. He inserted his card, typed in his PIN, and selected the cash withdrawal option. The screen flickered, then displayed a horrifying message: insufficient funds. His heart stopped. Impossible. He knew Eleanor had transferred $500,000 a few days ago, and he always kept at least. Panic seized him. He took a deep breath. "Calm down. It has to be a system glitch." He pulled out his phone and with trembling hands opened his mobile banking app. He had to enter his password and fingerprint. When the app opened, he felt his world collapse. The same figure stared back at him from his phone's screen. $17.45. All of his account savings, investment showed a balance of 0 or minuscule figures. It was as if a giant black hole had sucked away all his wealth. He returned to the table, his face pale. "Well?" Valerie asked sharply. "There must be a major problem with the banking system tonight. I can't access any of my accounts." His voice sounded weak. Valerie looked at him with disgust. "A banking problem? Or were you broke this whole time and just putting on a show?" "I am not broke," Julian hissed in a low voice, drawing the attention of the entire restaurant. To resolve the mortifying situation, Valerie had to pay with her own card, complaining endlessly. The ride back in her red sports car was cold and silent. The fire in their relationship had evaporated along with Julian's account balance. As soon as they got to Valerie's apartment, Julian tried to contact the bank's customer service, but it was after hours. He didn't know what to do. He felt isolated, disconnected from the world that propped him up. In his panic, only one rationalization came to mind. This has to be Eleanor. Maybe she had made a huge expenditure, or a hacker had targeted their accounts. Not for a moment did he consider that it could be a deliberate action by his docile wife. He had to go home. He had to talk to Eleanor, maybe yell at her, demand an explanation. He drove toward their home in a daze, leaving behind Valerie, who watched him with a cold stare from her apartment window. He didn't realize he was speeding toward his own judgment, one where the judge, jury, and executioner were the same person, the very woman waiting for him silently at home. Julian's drive home was a living hell. His thoughts raced faster than the car, trying to piece together an impossible puzzle. A system failure? It couldn't be that every bank, at the same time, had a problem only with his accounts. A hack? Who would hack him? He was never that important. Every road in his mind led back to one name: Eleanor. But his assumptions were still vague and unfocused. Maybe Eleanor had made a huge purchase without telling him and drained their joint account funds. Yes, that had to be it. Women didn't know how to control their spending, or maybe she had gotten scared about something and moved the money to a secure location. How foolish. She didn't understand how money worked. The anger gave him energy. The humiliation he had suffered in front of Valerie and the restaurant patrons morphed into a burning rage. He had found someone to blame, and Eleanor was the easiest target. He pictured himself bursting through the door, yelling at his wife, demanding an explanation for her carelessness, and then magnanimously forgiving her after she cried and apologized. The scenario gave him back a sliver of the control he had lost. When he turned onto the long, tree-lined driveway, the grandeur of the place felt like a slap in the face. The garden lights were on, illuminating the facade of the building, which looked serene and peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. He parked the red sports car, which had been his symbol of triumph, with a screech of tires, a violation of the night's stillness. He slammed the car door and strode toward the main entrance. He didn't need to use his key. The massive teakwood door was ajar. He stepped inside, ready to unleash his fury. "Eleanor," his voice boomed in the empty foyer. "Eleanor Vance, where are you?" There was no answer from upstairs. He thought she must be asleep, oblivious to the disaster that had occurred. His anger grew. He crossed the expansive living room and headed for the master suite, but his steps faltered. In the dimly lit family room, under the warm glow of a reading lamp, he saw her. Eleanor wasn't sleeping. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, dressed in silk pajamas, with a hardcover book in her lap. On a small table beside her, a cup of tea still sent up a faint wisp of steam. She looked so calm, so serene, as if she were enjoying a peaceful evening. The scene was so wrong, so discordant with the chaos Julian felt, that it threw him off balance. Eleanor looked up from her book. Her eyes met his. She didn't look surprised or scared. She just looked at him, her face impassive. "You're back?" she asked, her voice flat. Eleanor's calmness was like gasoline on the fire of Julian's rage. "Am I back? I just had the most humiliating night of my life, and you ask me if I'm back." His voice rose, shattering the elegant quiet of the room. Eleanor closed her book with a slow movement and set it on the table. She didn't get up from her chair. "Humiliating? Why?" "Why?" Julian laughed scornfully, pacing in front of her like a caged lion. "Because all of our cards were declined. I tried to get money from the ATM, and the balance was zero. I don't know what you've done with our money. But you've ruined us. Do you know that?" Eleanor took a sip of her tea. "They are not our cards, Julian. They are my cards, and I am not ruined. My finances are perfectly fine." The calm, logical response frustrated Julian even more. "What do you mean yours? We're married. What happened to all the accounts? What the hell did you do? Did you buy something expensive? Diamonds? Handbags? Explain yourself, Eleanor." He pointed a finger at her, trying to be threatening. "I didn't buy anything today," Eleanor replied with astonishing patience. "Then why is all the money gone? Don't tell me we've been scammed or hacked." "Oh my God, Eleanor, that has to be it. We have to call the police right now. All of our assets." "My assets are fine." Eleanor interrupted him again, her voice still quiet but now with a sharp, cold edge. "It seems the problem is only with your access." Julian stopped pacing. That last sentence finally cut through the fog of his anger. The problem is only with your access. That no longer sounded like an accident, it sounded like intent. He looked at his wife. He truly looked at her for the first time that night. The woman sitting before him was not the Eleanor Vance he knew. There was no softness, no resignation. There was something alien in her eyes, something hard as steel. A terrible premonition crept up his spine. He felt like prey that has just realized it has walked into a trap. "What? What do you mean?" he asked, his voice now stripped of all arrogance, with a slight tremble. Eleanor set down her teacup. She looked him directly in the eye, a gaze so penetrating that Julian felt naked. The silence filled the room. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to grow louder, counting down the last moments of the life Julian knew. Julian swallowed hard, his throat feeling dry. He wasn't yelling anymore. He moved closer, standing over Eleanor, who remained seated. It was an awkward posture, having to bend slightly to look down at his wife. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice now pleading. "Tell me what's happening." His inner storm had quieted, replaced by a cold, thick fear. He looked at his wife's face, the face that had until now been his guarantee of security and luxury, and for the first time, he realized he didn't know her at all. "What have you done?" he asked again. The phrase that had been an accusation was now a desperate question. Hearing that desperate question, something finally shifted inside Eleanor. The mask of calm she had worn for days didn't crack, it was deliberately discarded. Her impassive face slowly transformed into a smile. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A cold, authoritative smile, tinged with disappointment. The smile of a goddess delivering judgment upon a mortal who had offended her. "What have I done?" she repeated softly. "I've simply taken back what is mine." Julian stared at her, confused. "Yours? Eleanor, we built all of this together." Eleanor let out a small, dry, humorless laugh. "Don't fool yourself, Julian. Not even now. You built nothing. You were a guest I allowed to stay in my castle, whom I allowed to wear my king's clothes, whom I allowed to play with my toys." Each word was a slap. Julian took a step back, as if he had been physically struck. What are you talking about?" Eleanor didn't answer. She reached for the side table, not for her teacup, but for a thick manila envelope that had been lying there, unseen in the dim light. She dropped it on the coffee table between them and opened it. "You wanted an explanation, didn't you? Well, let's begin." She spoke with the tone of a CEO chairing a board meeting. She pulled out the first sheet. It was a large, glossy photograph. A picture of Valerie leaning arrogantly against the red Porsche with a triumphant smile. The photo, taken from an angle Valerie hadn't noticed, perfectly captured the essence of her arrogance. Julian's face went pale instantly. He recognized the woman, recognized the car. He opened his mouth to speak, to find a denial, an excuse, but no sound came out. Eleanor didn't wait. She placed the next sheet on top of the photo. It was a copy of a bank statement. Several transactions were highlighted in yellow. "This is the $500,000 transferred from my account to yours, and right below it, the down payment for this car to the dealership from your account. A car you bought her with my money, and which she proudly showed me, telling me she was worth far more than the boring old wife you have at home." Eleanor repeated Valerie's words in a flat, emotionless tone that made them 1,000 times more cutting. Julian gasped. He never imagined Valerie would be so stupid. Eleanor continued, placing the evidence one by one on the table, stacking them like cards in a game she had already won. "This," she said, dropping a series of credit card bills, "is proof of your stay in a romantic villa in the Hamptons, on the exact dates you were supposed to be at a conference in New York, complete with a bill for a couple's spa treatment. This receipt from a jewelry boutique is for the diamond earrings she is probably wearing right now. And this other stack of bills, designer bags, expensive dinners, countless gifts, all justified as representation or entertainment expenses. You didn't just cheat on me, Julian. You committed corruption within your own home. You embezzled funds from your primary source of financing." Julian stared, stunned, at the pile of papers on the table. It was his entire life of lies, laid out in an orderly, documented fashion. There was no room for denial, no space for excuses. He had been caught so flagrantly, so humiliatingly. He broke. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the plush rug in front of Eleanor. His image as a successful, powerful man had been shattered in a matter of minutes. "Eleanor, he stammered, searching for words. "I can explain. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please, forgive me." Tears began to stream down his cheeks, the tears of a man who didn't regret his actions, only being caught. Eleanor looked down at him from her chair. Her position was now elevated, gazing down at the man kneeling at her feet. She felt no compassion, no pity, only relief. "It's too late for apologies," Eleanor said quietly. "Your game is over." She pulled the last document from the envelope, the thickest one, stapled together. She slid it across the table until it stopped right in front of Julian on the floor. "What is this?" Julian whispered, his tear-filled eyes fixed on the document's cover page. "The divorce filing," Eleanor replied. "My lawyer filed it this morning. With all this evidence, the process will be very quick. You will get nothing. Our prenuptial agreement is very clear." Julian looked at the document, then back at Eleanor, total desperation now etched onto his face. "No, Eleanor, please don't do this. I love you. I'll leave her, I promise. We can start over. Think about our 5 years together." "5 years that I paid for," Eleanor retorted sharply. "And love? Don't make me laugh. You didn't love me. You loved my money, the comfort it provided, the status you got from being by my side. And now, all of that is going to end." Eleanor finally stood up from her chair. She walked to the doorway of the family room, her movements graceful and decisive. "Get out of my house, tonight." Her voice resonated in the silent room. "All of your privileges have been revoked. That sports car will be repossessed by the dealership tomorrow morning, as I will not be paying the installments. Your expensive clothes, your watches, everything in this house is mine. You can take the clothes you're wearing." She paused at the threshold, looking back at Julian one last time. He was still kneeling on the floor, sobbing amidst the pile of evidence of his betrayal. "You came into my life with nothing," Eleanor repeated, a phrase she had rehearsed in her mind. "And you will leave the same way." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Julian alone in the ruins of his life. The last smile of a wife had been delivered, and with it the door had been closed forever. The sound of Eleanor's footsteps retreating on the marble floor was the most deafening sound Julian had ever heard. Each step was like a giant hammer, shattering what was left of his world. He remained kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the printed evidence of his own stupidity. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The silence Eleanor left behind was more terrifying than any scream. For a moment, he didn't move. His brain refused to process reality. This had to be a nightmare. Soon, he would wake up in his comfortable bed with Eleanor beside him, and this would all be a fantasy created by his guilty conscience. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing for everything to return to normal when he opened them, but when he did, the stack of papers was still there. The divorce filing was still staring at him with its cold, black letters. The denial phase shattered, replaced by an overwhelming wave of panic. He had to do something. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't lose everything. With a panicked movement, he scrambled to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly. He rushed out of the family room, his eyes frantically searching for Eleanor. He saw her at the base of the grand spiral staircase, one hand on the banister, about to go up. "Eleanor, wait!" he cried, his voice hoarse from crying and desperation. Eleanor stopped, but she didn't turn around. Her back, straight and proud, looked like an impenetrable wall. Julian ran to her and grabbed her arm. His touch felt wrong, like touching a statue of ice. "Please, don't do this. Let's talk. I'll do anything." Eleanor finally turned, but her gaze didn't go to his face. She looked down at Julian's hand, gripping her arm with an expression of disgust. Slowly, as if he had been given an electric shock, Julian let go. "There's nothing left to talk about, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice without the slightest tremor. "Everything has been said. But I love you," Julian tried, his last weapon, the words that had always managed to melt her. "I know I made a mistake, a huge one, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. She's nothing. She was just a distraction. You're my world, Eleanor." The manipulation that had once been so effective now sounded hollow and pathetic. Eleanor didn't even blink. "If I were your world, you wouldn't have shattered it. You would have protected it. You didn't shatter my world, Julian. You simply tried to steal its contents. And now your time is up." She turned again and started up the stairs, one step at a time, with a calm, steady pace. Desperation made Julian lose his reason. He couldn't accept defeat. "I'm not leaving," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high walls of the foyer. "This is my home too. I'm your husband." At the top of the stairs, Eleanor paused and looked down at him. Their positions were now completely reversed. She was the queen on the balcony of her palace, looking down on him from above. "You are no longer my husband. And this was never your home. Now leave with what little dignity you have left, or I will have you removed without it." The threat made Julian's blood boil. "You can't throw me out." Eleanor didn't answer. She simply took out her phone, pressed a speed dial number, and held it to her ear. "Head of security, please come to the foyer right now. I have a guest who is refusing to leave." Less than a minute later, two large, stone-faced men in security uniforms entered through a side door. They were the head of security and his subordinate, the same men who had always greeted Julian with respect, opened the door for him and called him Sir. They stopped in front of Julian, standing at attention. The older one, the head of security, looked at Julian with an apologetic but firm expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. Ma'am has asked that you vacate the property." This sight was the pinnacle of humiliation, being escorted out of his own home by his own employees. Julian's face turned red with rage and shame. "You can't touch me. I pay your salaries." "Our salary is paid by Mrs. Vance, sir," the head of security replied calmly. "Please don't make this more difficult." Julian looked at the two guards, then up at Eleanor, who was still observing from the top of the stairs like a director, making sure the final scene played out according to the script. He realized he had lost. Physical resistance would only add to his list of humiliations. Completely defeated, his shoulders slumped, he turned around. He walked past the two uniformed men and headed for the front door, which was still open. Every step felt like he was carrying a ton of weight. He didn't dare look back. He didn't want to see the triumphant smile he imagined on Eleanor's face, though he suspected there might not be a smile at all, just emptiness. As he crossed the threshold into the cold night air, he heard a voice from behind him. "One moment," Eleanor said from the top of the stairs. A foolish spark of hope briefly ignited in Julian's heart. Has she changed her mind? He stopped and turned slowly. Eleanor wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his hand. "Leave the car keys on the console table by the door. That car is not yours." The hope was extinguished as quickly as it had arrived. The final humiliation. Without a word, he fumbled in his pockets and pulled out the keys with the Porsche logo, the symbol of his glory just hours before. He stepped back inside, dropped them with a small clatter on the marble console table, and walked out again without looking at anyone. As soon as he was outside, the heavy teakwood door closed behind him with a firm, final click. The sound of the lock turning from the inside was so distinct it sealed his fate. He stood alone on the dark driveway. Behind him, a palace filled with light and warmth. In front of him, darkness and uncertainty. He looked at the red sports car, which now seemed like a monument to his stupidity. He couldn't even leave in it. He checked his pockets, only his wallet filled with useless cards and his phone. He opened his taxi app, only to realize with horror that his digital wallet balance was also zero. He had nothing. Absolutely nothing. He collapsed onto the cold cobblestones, in front of the gates of the home he could never enter again. His choked sobs were lost in the silence of the night. The door was closed, and behind it, his 5 years of a glorious life were gone forever. 1 year passed, the seasons changed, and so did lives. For Eleanor, that year was a process of detoxification and reconstruction. The divorce was swift and efficient, just as Claire had promised. With the overwhelming evidence, Julian had no ground to fight on. He vanished from Eleanor's life as quickly as he had entered, leaving only a fading mark. Eleanor dove back into her work with a renewed energy. Without the emotional baggage and the exhausting theatrics, her mind was sharper, her decisions bolder. The Sterling Group launched 2 new luxury hotel projects and acquired a rival real estate firm. Under her sole leadership, her business empire shone brighter than ever. But the biggest change wasn't on the financial balance sheets. It was within her. The empty space in her bed now felt like room to breathe. The silence in her home was no longer a sign of loneliness but of peace. She rediscovered old hobbies, painting, horseback riding, and solo trips with just a backpack. Her smiles were more frequent now, genuine and no longer shadowed by doubt. One sunny Sunday afternoon, Eleanor was sitting with Claire at a trendy rooftop cafe downtown. They were enjoying coffee and cake, watching the bustling streets below. A gentle breeze played with Eleanor's hair, now longer. "I haven't seen you this happy in a long time, Elle," Claire said, smiling sincerely at her friend. "I feel like I just got out of a prison I built myself," Eleanor replied, her gaze lost in the distance. "Funnily enough, I don't even hate him anymore. I feel nothing. It was just a very expensive business lesson." Claire laughed. "A lesson that's made you billions, you mean?" And they both laughed together. It was then, in the middle of their laughter, that Eleanor's attention was drawn to a small commotion at the intersection below. A beat-up green sedan, a model that had been popular about 20 years ago, had stalled in the middle of the road. Thick white smoke was billowing from the hood, creating a pathetic and comical scene. The drivers behind began honking their horns incessantly. A man got out of the driver's side of the old car. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans with a small tear in the knee. His hair was a bit long and unkempt, and his face looked tired under the afternoon Sunday. He yanked the hood open, only to jump back as a puff of hot steam hit him in the face. Eleanor squinted. There was something familiar about the man's posture. Just then, the passenger door flew open. A woman stormed out, yelling. She wore a dress too tight for the heat and too much makeup. She was pointing a finger at the driver, furious, her movements filled with drama. Claire's eyes widened as she followed Eleanor's gaze. "Wait a minute, is that—" Eleanor nodded silently, her eyes never leaving the scene below. The man was Julian, and the woman was Valerie. They looked so different. The aura of luxury and arrogance that had once surrounded them was completely gone, replaced by an air of desperation and irritation. Julian no longer looked like a charismatic young executive. He looked like a middle-aged man beaten down by life. Valerie no longer looked like a high society mistress. She looked like a bad-tempered woman trapped by bad luck. "I told you to get this piece of junk fixed, but you never listened to me." Valerie's shrill voice carried faintly up to the rooftop. "Now look, we're going to be late. How embarrassing." "Shut up," Julian shot back, his voice weary. "You think I have the money to fix it? We can barely make rent and buy you your new handbag." Their street-side fight, amidst the smoke and honking horns, was a tragicomic spectacle, the symbol of their downfall, on display for the world to see. The red sports car had become a smoking wreck. The luxury apartment had become a small rental. The love based on material things had crumbled when the material things disappeared. Watching that scene, seeing the two people who had once caused her so much pain now hurting each other over trivial matters, Eleanor couldn't help it. A small chuckle escaped her lips. The chuckle grew, becoming louder, freer, until it finally erupted into full-blown laughter. She covered her mouth, trying to contain it, but tears of amusement began to well up in her eyes. It wasn't a bitter laugh, or a laugh of vengeful satisfaction. It was pure and genuine, the laughter that comes from realizing how absurd life can be. She laughed at the irony of fate. She laughed at their stupidity, and she laughed at the past Eleanor who had once considered that man her world. Claire watched her for a moment, and then a wide grin spread across her face, relieved to see her friend finally free from all the baggage of the past. Still catching the last of her laughter, Eleanor raised her half-finished coffee cup. She lifted it slightly toward the scene below, toward Julian and Valerie still arguing heatedly, a silent toast to karma, which sometimes arrives not in the form of thunder and lightning, but in the form of the best kind of comedy. And then she turned back, drank her coffee, and started talking to her friend about the future.